gelungen, obwohl in der letzten Zeit
we succeeded, despite the fact that the most important currency between us, trust in each other, has been deeply shaken.
doch schwer erschüttert worden.
Welcome back to The Heat. That was German Chancellor Angela Merkel speaking about an agreement reached with Greece that could result in a $95 billion bailout. The Greek parliament has until Wednesday to enact key reforms to secure a financial rescue package. Joining us now in our Washington, D.C. bureau is Scheherazade Rehman. Thank you so much for joining us. She's a research Fulbright Scholar, the director of the European Union Research Centre at George Washington University. Let's get on into the economics of this. This looks like a really, really tough deal for the Greek people. What do they have to do going forward? Just laying out in economic terms.
Well, they've got to do much more austerity. Labour market reforms have to happen. That means labour costs have to drop. Pensions are going to be cut. They have oversight now from international institutions in terms of even their legislation that they have to pass. So this is a tough deal all the way around.
This feels like economic colonialism. In fact, some Greeks have said that. Is that...
Well, I would say it looks like it, but let's look at the process that led us there.
Right.
Cyprus left the international community with very little choice, so much so that they actually have to create a trust fund to put valuable 50 billion euros worth of Greek assets then to privatize and to...
So what are we talking about here? Like electricity companies, water companies have to go in this separate thing, and the European...
Ferries.
Really?
That's correct.
I mean, this seems like not the beginning of the end, but the end of the beginning for the Greek people. How long are we talking?
Well, we're definitely going to get a lot worse before we get better. So we're talking about a decade of pain, if not more. And that's if the Greeks actually go ahead with the reforms, because this new $82 billion that's been promised to them is contingent upon the appropriate legislation and actually then implementing them. So
if you were Greek now and you had your government that came in and said, look, we're going to have the end to austerity, when they negotiated and said, we're going to go for a referendum, the Greeks then voted again for the end of austerity, but then you have Alexis Tsipras go and negotiate this deal, which looks like a lot more austerity. I mean, what can the Greek people do?
Well, at this point, absolutely nothing. In staying in the euro is the primary objective right now, and the only way he could do that is by signing the deal. The bad news for the Greek people is they voted in a government, and you can't blame them. They were at the end of their rope after 5 years of austerity. They voted in a fringe government, promising a silver bullet of no austerity and more money. And then they held a referendum for the international community to say, we all vote, we are not going to pay you back. That's not how you negotiate on the international stage, and that's what you get when you have fringe governments.
So is this the result of Alexis Tsipras' government being elected, that they destroyed all trust with their European partners, so they actually ended up getting a worse deal?
This last bit is absolutely true. Tsipras did not do his people any favors. His political shelf life is limited.
But you can have some sympathy for the Greek people, because they did not vote for every loan that was given to them. And the European project, especially the euro, was all about developing the southern economies, the less productive economies like Greece, like Spain, like Portugal, and making them more like Germany and perhaps France. That hasn't worked. So is it really their fault? Well,
let's step back a little bit. This crisis, when it erupted in early 2010, was mangled. The European Union mangled it. The European Central Bank did not have the tools to handle crisis management. And the Europeans did not understand how to manage a financial crisis like we did in the United States. Liquidity only came 21 months later after a protracted bailout, so the contamination had then spread from Greece to Spain to Portugal, and the markets panicked. So they definitely bungled this. But the point is, we are now here 5 years later, and then put a government in power that makes things horrendously worse for the Greeks in terms of a package that they bring home. That doesn't help. So the Greeks could have probably negotiated a better deal if early on, in early spring, they had sat down at the table, negotiated in good faith, and not lost the trust of the other 18 euro members.
You're an economist. Why didn't Greece just say, this is too difficult, let's leave the euro, bring back the drachma, we can devalue our currency, exports will grow, finance will come in?
Sounds great, doesn't it? But it would never work. It would be a death sentence for the Greek economy. I'm not talking about decades of pain, then I'm talking about at least 50 decades of pain. Because it's simple. Right now, having the euro as a currency, the 2-year bond yields are close to 50%. The 10 years are close to 17%.
That's the interest that people have to pay, that Greece has to pay on these bonds,
That's
right?
correct. Now, that's with having the euro. Now, having a new drachma is like having monopoly money. They would have to pay very, very high rates because it will have zero credibility in the markets, and their debts would triple, quadruple overnight because their debt is in euro.
What about the quality of life of the Greek people? Would that have been better?
Nope, absolutely not. It will get even worse.
So where does Greece go from here?
In more pain for at least the next 2 or 3 years, and then hopefully back to zero growth, and then hopefully at the end of 10 years or close to 8 or 9 years, they are now showing positive signs over 0%.
So where does Europe go from here? I mean, we've talked about Greece, and as you said before we came on, you know, Greece is only 2% of the European economy. So even though we've been obsessed with this crisis, there's 98% left to worry about.
There is.
So where do we go here from the euro? What has happened this week in terms of the European project and the future of the euro? Is it better? Is it worse?
Well, I think it's better. It's better in the sense that, well, let's talk about where we go from here. Europe has to deal with a very, very large issue that's looming over them that they haven't had time to deal with because they've been dealing with the Greek issue, and that's the immigration issue. That has to be resolved. As far as the euro project is concerned, I think a good thing has happened, that the Europeans and the IMF realized that austerity measures and not doing crisis management right up front, doing too much austerity and not crisis management, is a bad policy. It undermines the entire Eurozone. So I think the next time a country is in trouble, they will think twice about putting too much austerity, and they will do crisis management right away, which I think the European Central Bank is set to do.
So do you think Greece is sort of the guinea pig for getting it wrong in Europe? I mean, when the financial crisis hit here, for example, $700 billion injected in the economy almost overnight, although we did have that vote in Congress. If you look at the Chinese stock market sell-off, massive amounts of liquidity going in right now. So Europe's got it wrong financially, but Greece has to pay?
Well, unfortunately, yes, they got it wrong because right now the financial crisis is about contamination, contagion, and stopping that. And the only way to stop a crisis of confidence is liquidity. And the Europeans muddled this for 21 months. But the reality is that this government did not help them negotiate and use that very argument. In fact, a report came out a couple of weeks ago from the IMF saying, you know, we messed this up. We should have done less austerity. They didn't say it quite in those terms, but the Greeks could have used that report before doing the referendum and said, look, this was wrong. Let's reassess, let's restructure our debt. And that would have been a good starting point. We will sign the deal. But saying no austerity and no more money is not the way to go.
That IMF report was incredible because the Greek government actually hate the IMF, but they jumped on that report and said, look, the IMF says we can't pay this back. Let's help us.
But here's the catch, though. It was too late. They had held the referendum, and you know, the referendum was, we are not going to, the people don't want to pay the IMF back. Well, every country did that, the IMF would be out of business. So they left the IMF with zero room to negotiate. So that's what really did them in.
There's always a political fallout for this. You know, we saw Germany really saying, look, you must stick with the program, Athens. But we saw Paris, France, saying, look, we've got to keep Greece in the euro. Everyone knows that France and Germany drive the European project. What are the lessons politically going forward from this?
Yeah, I wouldn't read that much into it. I think, you know, the French are more sympathetic, partly because of the party that is in power right now with Hollande. And I think the Germans have been very good with the Greeks until the referendum. So I wouldn't read too much into it. I think maybe a little bit of bad cop, good cop was going on there. But the French never asked for any new terms or easier terms. They were simply there for support.
But this is not over, is it?
I think for the Greeks, no. This is going to be a lot more pain and scrutiny down the road.
Scheherazade Rehman, thank you so much for joining us. Lots more pain for the Greeks, even though there is a deal. That's it for the edition of The Heat. For more on Greece's debt crisis, be sure to follow our extensive coverage on cctv-america.com. I'm Nathan Kim, Washington. Thanks so much for watching.